I want you to try something with me. Imagine a man sitting across from you. He's holding a stopwatch. He says a word, table.
And you say chair.
He says blue.
Yeah.
You say sky. It's, effortless. But then he says mother, and you stop.
Mm.
Maybe just for a split second.
Mm.
A hesitation, a stumble.
Mm.
According to Carl Jung, way back in 1910, that tiny silence isn't just a pause.
No, he said it was the sound of a complex, a hidden knot in your psyche.
The famous word association test. It's been the bread and butter of psychoanalysis for over a century.
It really has. Jung believed that latency, that delay in your response, was the smoking gun. It showed where the demons were hiding, so to speak.
But here's the problem with Jung, and honestly with a lot of early psychology. He was working entirely with the mind.
Right. Abstract concepts, archetypes, the collective unconscious.
He didn't have an MRI machine. He couldn't, pop the hood and look at the engine.
He was diagnosing the software glitches without ever seeing the hardware, effectively.
So that is our mission today. We are bridging a 100-year gap. We've got a fascinating stack of research here, a literature review, and a research proposal by a student named Anna Gachins, some AI-generated theoretical frameworks.
And a really dense 2010 neuroscience study by Kanska and Coates.
And we are going to try to drag Jung's complexes into the world of high-tech neuroscience.
It is a really ambitious project. We're asking a fundamental question. When you freeze up at a trigger word, or when you feel that emotional gut punch, what is physically happening in the biological tissue?
Is a complex just a ghost in the machine, or can we actually measure it with, electricity?
Yeah, can we find it?
Before we get to the brain scans, though, we have to talk about how this research was even set up. Gachins starts her proposal with a really strong warning about how we do science.
She does.
She talks about premature closure. Now, that sounds like a bad business deal, but I'm guessing in science it's more dangerous.
Oh, much more dangerous. Premature closure is essentially deciding on the answer before you've even asked the full question. It's having a hypothesis and then sort of wearing blinders so you only see the data that fits.
Right.
Gachins uses a classic, slightly embarrassing example from astronomy to prove this point.
The Mars Canals.
The Mars Canals.
Yeah.
In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Percival Lowell and others were convinced, absolutely certain, that they could see artificial waterways on Mars through their telescopes.
Wow.
They mapped them. They named them.
They thought they were seeing a dying civilization trying to irrigate their planet.
Right. Exactly. But the canals weren't there. They were looking at random noise on the surface of Mars, and their brains connected the dots into lines because they wanted to see lines. They were projecting their own expectations onto the data.
That's a powerful image. The astronomer looking through a telescope and seeing his own reflection instead of the planet. And Gachins argues researchers do this with the human mind, too.
Constantly. She points out that if you don't do a thorough, unbiased literature review, you end up with gaps. Places where entire realities are ignored because they just don't fit the dominant theory.
And she brings up the 1952 DSM, the first diagnostic manual for psychiatry.
Yeah.
I read this part of the notes, and I have to say, it stopped me cold.
It's a really stark example. In 1952, the consensus was that incest was incredibly rare and, based on the psychoanalytic theories of the time, not necessarily traumatic.
Yes.
The manual even suggested that incestuous dynamics could stabilize a fragile personality.
That is horrific to hear now.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to imagine a group of doctors agreeing on that.
But they didn't see the trauma because their telescope, their theoretical framework, it just wasn't built to look for it. They had premature closure. They assumed the family unit was a certain way, so they ignored the evidence of harm.
She also mentions the lived experience gap, which I think is super relevant today. This idea that groups like Alcoholics Anonymous or Recovery Dharma might know more about addiction than the textbooks do.
Right, because they are the consumers of the mental health experience. But because they aren't writing peer-reviewed papers, the academic world can often just ignore that data.
So Gachins is saying if we want to find the biological root of a complex, we can't be like those astronomers.
We have to look at everything, the biology, the psychology, the messy stuff, the uncomfortable stuff.
Okay, so keeping that warning in mind, that we shouldn't just look for what we expect to find, let's look at the brain. Gachins wants to localize the complex.
She wants to find where it lives.
And to do that, she brings in a theory called predictive coding, or hierarchical inference.
This is one of the hottest theories in neuroscience right now.
I've heard it described as the brain being a hallucination machine. Is that accurate?
In a way, yes. The old model of the brain was that it was like a camera, light comes in, the brain processes it, and then tells you what you're seeing.
Okay.
predictive coding flips that. It says the brain is a prediction engine. It is constantly projecting a model of the world out onto your senses.
So I'm not just seeing a coffee cup on the desk. My brain is predicting a coffee cup is there, and my eyes are just confirming it.
Precisely. It's all about efficiency. If the brain had to process every photon of light and every sound wave from scratch, you'd be paralyzed. So it guesses.
I'm in a studio, there's a mic, there's a host.
And as long as the sensory data matches the prediction, the brain is quiet. It's on autopilot.
But what happens when the prediction is wrong? What if I reach for the coffee cup and it's actually a hologram or a snake?
That is a prediction error.
Yeah.
The input violates the expectation. The brain suddenly screams, wait, mismatch. That's to stop, reallocate energy, and update the model.
And this is where Jung comes back in. Gachens is arguing that a complex is basically just a massive, unresolved prediction error.
Yes. Think about the word association test again. You hear table, you predict chair, easy, no error. The neural pathways are clear. But if you hear mother and you have a history of trauma,
My brain predicts safety.
your brain might predict mother equals safety. But your memory banks, the hippocampus and amygdala, they slam down a card that says mother equals threat.
So I have a collision. The prediction and the reality don't match.
And that collision creates a massive error signal. That signal has to be processed. It takes time to resolve that conflict.
And that time is what Jung called latency.
Exactly. Neuroscience calls it resolving the prediction error.
So the ghost in the machine is actually just a pileup of data that the brain has to sort through before it can let me speak.
It turns a psychological hang-up into a data processing issue.
Yeah.
It's less about repressing a thought and more about the brain's CPU hitting 100% usage while it tries to recalculate reality.
That makes sense. But here is where I get a little stuck. Gachens uses a specific study to prove this, the Kanske and Kotz study from 2010. And looking at the results, there seems to be a huge contradiction.
You noticed that?
I did. Jung says the complex causes a delay. We freeze up, we stutter. But Kanske and Kotz say that emotional triggers make us faster. How can both of those things be true?
It does sound like a paradox, doesn't it? Let's look at that Kanske court study closely. It wasn't a word association test. It was something called a flanker task.
Right, the flanker task. Describe this for us because the setup really matters here.
Okay, so imagine you're looking at a screen. In the center, there's a word. Let's say the word is table. Above and below it are other words. Those are the flankers. Your job isn't to read the word.
My job is to identify the color of the text, red or green.
Exactly.
So I see table in red ink, I press the red button. Simple.
But the flankers are trying to confuse you. Maybe the flanker words are printed in green, so you have a conflict, visual noise.
Okay.
Now, here is the twist. Kanske and Kotz introduced emotional words. Negative, high arousal words like death or terror.
Okay, so I'm looking at the word death written in red ink. My gut instinct says I should freeze up. That's the Jungian response, right? I see a threat, I stop.
But the study found the exact opposite. When the center word was emotional, when it was death instead of table, the participants were significantly faster at identifying the color.
Wait, faster.
They resolved the conflict quicker.
I don't get it. If I'm walking in the woods and I see a bear, I don't solve a math problem faster. I panic. Why does the emotional word speed up the brain?
Because of the nature of the task. This is the crucial distinction Gachens makes. In Jung's test, you have to find a word. It's an open-ended search. Mother.
To scan your whole memory.
Yes. The anxiety floods the system and it jams the search engine.
Okay, so anxiety breaks the search function.
But in the flanker task, you aren't searching. You have a binary choice. Red or green. It's a survival reaction. Fight or flight isn't about sitting around pondering. It's about making a snap decision.
So when the amygdala sees death, it hits a panic button that says, stop thinking, just act.
Basically. The researchers argue that emotion triggers executive attention. The amygdala shouts at the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, and says, we have a high priority situation, focus.
It clears the neural traffic jam.
Exactly. So you can resolve the immediate conflict, in this case, the color, instantly.
So the prediction error is still happening. The brain is still shocked by the word death. But instead of freezing, it dumps like nitrous oxide into the engine.
That's a great way to put it. And they measured this with something called the N200.
The N200, we need to really visualize this. What are we looking at here?
The N200 is an event-related potential. It's a spike in electrical voltage in the brain that happens roughly 200 milliseconds after you see a stimulus.
200 milliseconds. That is literally the blink of an eye.
It's faster, usually. It's subconscious. I mean, you haven't even fully realized you're reading the word yet. The N200 is a negative dip in electricity, and it is famously linked to conflict monitoring.
It's the brain's uh-oh signal.
Precisely. It's the spark that flies when the expectation hits the reality.
And in the Kanskin and Code study, when people saw the word death,
That N200 spike was huge, much larger than for the word table.
so the brain is shouting louder.
It's shouting louder and earlier. It proves that emotion doesn't come after thinking. Emotion is integrated into the processing within a fraction of a second. It changes the gain, the sensitivity of the neural firing.
That answers the paradox then.
Yeah,
The complex, or the N200 spike, is the same mechanism in both cases.
right. It's the brain detecting a threat.
But what you do with that threat, whether you freeze or you speed up, depends on if you need to find a word or just push a button.
You nailed it. It's context-dependent resource allocation. Jung saw the freeze, Kanska saw the speed, but they were both looking at the same underlying prediction error.
This brings us to the final piece of Gaichen's puzzle. She's a student. She has this great theory connecting Jung to the N200, but she can't just go rent an MRI machine and replicate the Kanska study.
No.
That costs, what, thousands of dollars an hour?
Easily. And you need ethics approval, participant recruitment. It's a massive undertaking. So she decides to do something that is becoming really common in modern science. She builds a toy model.
Toy model sounds like she's building with Legos. But reading the notes, this seems like some pretty serious math.
It is. Think of it less like Lego and more like a video game physics engine. You know how game developers don't actually film real cars crashing?
Right. They write code that simulates gravity and friction.
And mass, to predict how a car would crash. They build a digital twin of reality.
That's what Gaichen's is doing.
Yes.
Huh.
She proposes using a prediction error accumulation model. She's writing a computer program that simulates how a brain makes a decision.
So she creates a virtual brain in the code.
A simplified one, yeah. She gives this virtual brain a threshold. Imagine a bucket. The bucket has to fill up with water before the decision is made.
And the water is the information coming in.
The water is the prediction error. If the word is table, it's a slow drip. If the word is death, it's a fire hose.
Because the N200 spike is bigger.
Exactly. Now here's the clever part. She can tweak the variables in her code-like tuning dials on a mixing board. She can turn up the noise dial. She can lower the threshold dial.
And her goal is to keep tweaking those dials.
Until her virtual brain produces the exact same reaction times as the 26 women in the Kanska and Code study.
Why go through all that trouble? Why not just trust the study?
Because if she can match the real human data using just a math formula based on prediction errors, it proves the mechanism works. It proves that you don't need ghosts or spirits to explain the complex.
You just need a variable for error accumulation rate.
Right. It is fascinating. It basically validates the theory by reverse engineering the human behavior.
It suggests that our deepest traumas, our wildest emotional triggers, can actually be modeled mathematically.
It demystifies the complex. It's not a stain on your soul. It's a variable in your processing speed.
So if we zoom out, we started with Jung listening for a pause in a quiet room. We went to the Mars astronomer, seeing canals that weren't there. And now we're at a computer simulation of a brain on fire. What's the through line here?
The through line is projection. The astronomer projected canals onto Mars because he expected to see them.
And the brain projects danger onto the word mother because it expects to be hurt.
Exactly. And both of those are errors.
They are. But the difference is the astronomer couldn't fix his telescope. We can actually look at the mechanism of the brain. We can see that N200 spike. We can see the gain turning up on the synapse.
It changes how I view my own reactions. When I get defensive or when I shut down,
It's not a moral failing.
it's your internal prediction engine encountering a mismatch. It's your N200 going off.
And that toy model gives me a weird amount of hope. Because if our trauma response is just a set of variables in an equation threshold, accumulation rate, noise.
Then theoretically variables can be changed.
Right. We always talk about rewiring the brain, but this makes it sound so literal. Like, if we can identify the code, maybe one day we can patch the software.
It's the ultimate goal of computational psychiatry. To stop treating the symptoms and start debugging the code.
It brings us back to that astronomer.
Mm.
He died leaving in those canals. He was trapped in his own projection. But because we can now measure the error, maybe we don't have to be trapped. We can realize the canal isn't real. It's just noise in the system.
And once you know it's just noise, you can stop predicting the threat. You can start seeing the planet as it actually is.
That is a hefty thought to carry into the rest of the day. Next time you stutter or freeze, Just remember, it's just a prediction error. Thanks for diving in with us.
Always a pleasure.